Chapter 10. Night Operations. Introduction. The mechanical operation of an airplane at night is no different than operating the same airplane during the day. The airplane does not know if it is being operated in the dark or bright sunlight. It performs and responds to control inputs by the pilot. The pilot, however, is affected by various aspects of night operations and must take them into consideration during night flight operations. Some are actual physical limitations affecting all pilots, while others, such as equipment requirements, procedures, and emergency situations, must also be considered. According to Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, 14 CFR, Part 1, Definitions and Abbreviations, night is defined as the time between the end of evening civil twilight and the beginning of morning civil twilight. To explain further, morning civil twilight begins when the geometric center of the sun is 6 degrees below the horizon and ends at sunrise. Evening civil twilight begins at sunset and ends when the geometric center of the sun reaches 6 degrees below the horizon. 10-1. For 14 CFR Part 61 operations, the term night refers to 1 hour after sunset and ending 1 hour before sunrise, as 14 CFR Part 61 explains that between those hours no person may act as pilot in command, PIC, of an aircraft carrying passengers unless within the preceding 90 days that person has made at least 3 takeoffs and 3 landings to a full stop during that night period. Night flying operations should not be encouraged or attempted except by certificated pilots with knowledge of and experience in the topics discussed in this chapter. Night vision. Generally, most pilots are poorly informed about night vision. Human eyes never function as effectively at night as the eyes of animals with nocturnal habits, but if humans learn how to use their eyes correctly and know their limitations, night vision can be improved significantly. The brain and eyes act as a team. For a person to see well, both must be used effectively. Due to the physiology of the eye, limitations on sight are experienced in low light conditions, such as at night. To see at night, the eyes are used differently than during the day. Therefore, it is important to understand the eye's construction and how the eye is affected by darkness. Innumerable light-sensitive nerves called cones and rods are located at the back of the eye or retina, a layer upon which all images are focused. These nerves connect to the cells of the optic nerve, which transmits messages directly to the brain. The cones are located in the center of the retina, and the rods are concentrated in a ring around the cones. Figure 10.1. The function of the cones is to detect color, details, and faraway objects. The rods function when something is seen out of the corner of the eye or peripheral vision. They detect objects, particularly those that are moving, but do not give detail or color, only shades of gray. Both the cones and the rods are used for vision during daylight. Although there is not a clear-cut division of function, the rods make night vision possible. The rods and cones function in daylight and in moonlight, but in the absence of normal light, the process of night vision is placed almost entirely on the rods. The rods are distributed in a band around the cones and do not lie directly behind the pupils, which makes off-center viewing, looking to one side of an object, important during night flight. During daylight, an object can be seen best by looking directly at it, but at night there is a blind spot in the center of the field of vision, the night blind spot. If an object is in this area, it may not be seen. The size of this blind spot increases as the distance between the eye and the object increases, as illustrated in Figure 10.1. Therefore, the night blind spot can hide. 10-2. Cones for color, detail, day. Rods for gray, peripheral, day and night. Area of best day vision. N. HTVISIO. STNIG. E. AOFB. ARE. Night blind spot. Area of best night vision. Figure 10.1. Rods and cones. Larger objects. As the distance between the pilot and an object increases, use of a scanning procedure to permit off-center viewing of the object is more effective. Consciously practice this scanning procedure to improve night vision. The eye's adaptation to darkness is another important aspect of night vision. When a dark room is entered, it is difficult to see anything until the eyes become adjusted to the darkness. Almost everyone experiences this when entering a darkened movie theater. In this process, the pupils of the eyes first enlarge to receive as much of the available light as possible. After approximately 5 to 10 minutes, the cones become adjusted to the dim light and the eyes become approximately 100 times more sensitive to the light than they were before the dark room was entered. Much more time, About 30 minutes is needed for the rods to become adjusted to darkness, but when they do adjust, they are about 100,000 times more sensitive to light than they were in the lighted area. After the adaptation process is complete, much more can be seen, especially if scanning techniques are used correctly. After the eyes have adapted to the dark, the entire process is reversed when entering a lighted room. The eyes are first dazzled by the brightness, but become completely adjusted in a very few seconds, thereby losing their adaptation to the dark. Now, if the dark room is re-entered, the eyes again go through the long process of adapting to the darkness. Before and during night flight, the adaptation process of the eyes must be considered. First, adapt to the low level of light and then stay adapted. After the eyes are adapted to the darkness, avoid exposing them for more than 1 second to any bright white light as that causes temporary blindness. If exposed to a bright light source, such as searchlights and landing lights, remember that each eye adapts to the dark independently. By closing or covering one eye when exposed to light, some night vision acuity is retained in the closed eye. Temporary blindness, caused by an unusually bright light, may result in illusions or after images until the eyes recover from the brightness. The brain creates these illusions reported by the eyes. This results in misjudging or incorrectly identifying objects, such as mistaking slanted clouds for the horizon or populated areas for a landing field. Vertigo is experienced as a feeling of dizziness and imbalance that can create or increase illusions. The illusions seem very real and pilots at every level of experience and skill can be affected. Recognizing that the brain and eyes can play tricks in this manner is the best protection for flying at night. Good eyesight depends upon physical condition. Fatigue, colds, vitamin deficiency, alcohol, stimulants, smoking, or medication can seriously impair vision. Keep these facts in mind and take adequate precautions to safeguard night vision. In addition to the principles previously discussed, the following items aid in increasing night vision effectiveness. Adapt the eyes to darkness prior to flight and keep them adapted. About 30 minutes is needed to adjust the eyes to maximum efficiency after exposure to a bright light. If oxygen is available, use it during night flying. Keep in mind that a significant deterioration in night vision can occur at cabin altitudes as low as 5,000 feet. Close one eye when exposed to bright light to help avoid the blinding effect. Do not wear sunglasses after sunset as this impairs night vision. Move the eyes more slowly than in daylight. Blink the eyes if they become blurred. Concentrate on seeing objects. Force the eyes to view off-center using scanning techniques. Maintain good physical condition. Avoid smoking, drinking, and using drugs that may be harmful. Night illusions. In addition to night vision limitations, night illusions can cause confusion and distractions during night flying. The following discussion covers some of the common situations that cause illusions associated with night flying. On a clear night, distant stationary lights can be mistaken for stars or other aircraft. Cloud layers or even the northern lights can confuse a pilot and indicate a false visual horizon. Certain geometrical patterns of ground lights, such as a freeway, runway, approach, or even lights on a moving train, can cause confusion. Dark nights tend to eliminate reference to a visual horizon. As a result, pilots need to rely less on outside references at night and more on flight and navigation instruments. Visual autokinesis can occur when staring at a single light source for several seconds on a dark night. The result is that the light appears to be moving. The autokinesis effect will not occur if the visual field is expanded through scanning techniques. A good scanning procedure reduces the probability of vision becoming fixed on one source of light. Distractions and problems can result from a flickering light in the flight deck, anti-collision light, or other aircraft lights and can cause flicker vertigo. If continuous, the possible physical reactions can be nausea, dizziness, grogginess, unconsciousness, headaches, or confusion. Try to eliminate any light source causing blinking or flickering problems in the flight deck. A black hole approach occurs when the landing is made from over water and unlighted terrain where the runway lights are the only source of light. Without peripheral visual cues to help, orientation is difficult. The runway can seem out of position, downsloping or upsloping, and in the worst case, results in landing short of the runway. If an 10:3 electronic glide slope or visual approach slope indicator, VASI, is available, it should be used. If navigation aids, NavAids, are unavailable, Use the flight instruments to assist in maintaining orientation and a normal approach. Anytime position in relation to the runway or altitude is in doubt, execute a go-around. Bright runway and approach lighting systems, especially where few lights illuminate the surrounding terrain, may create the illusion of being lower or having less distance to the runway. In this situation, the tendency is to fly a higher approach. Also, flying over terrain with only a few lights makes the runway recede or appear farther away. With this situation, the tendency is to fly a lower than normal approach. If the runway has a city in the distance on higher terrain, the tendency is to fly a lower than normal approach. A good review of the airfield layout and boundaries before initiating any approach helps maintain a safe approach angle. Illusions created by runway lights result in a variety of problems. Bright lights or bold colors advance the runway, making it appear closer. Night landings are further complicated by the difficulty of judging distance and the possibility of confusing approach and runway lights. For example, when a double row of approach lights joins the boundary lights of the runway, there can be confusion where the approach lights terminate and runway lights begin. Under certain conditions, approach lights can make the aircraft seem higher in a turn to final than when its wings are level. Pilot equipment before beginning a night flight. Carefully consider personal equipment that should be readily available during the flight to include a flashlight, aeronautical charts and pertinent data for the flight, and a flight deck checklist containing procedures for the following tasks, which can be found in 14 CFR Part 91. Before starting engines. Before takeoff. Cruise. Before landing. After landing. Stopping engines. Emergencies. At least one reliable flashlight is recommended as standard equipment on all night flights. A reliable incandescent or light-emitting diode, LED, flashlight able to produce white/red light and blue for chart reading is preferable. The flashlight should be large enough to be easily located in the event it is needed. The white light is used while performing 10-4. The pre-flight visual inspection of the airplane, and the red light is used when performing cockpit operations. It is also recommended to have a spare set of batteries for the flashlight readily available. Since the red light is non-glaring, it will not impair night vision. Some pilots prefer two flashlights, one with a white light for pre-flight and the other a pen light type with a red light. The latter can be suspended by a string from around the neck to ensure the light is always readily available. One word of caution: if a red light is used for reading an aeronautical chart, the red features of the chart will not show up. Aeronautical charts are essential for night cross-country flight and, if the intended course is near the edge of the chart, the adjacent chart should also be available. The lights of cities and towns can be seen at surprising distances at night, and if this adjacent chart is not available to identify those landmarks, confusion could result. These checklist items are not just for night flying, they are required for daylight flying also. Regardless of the equipment used, organization of the flight deck eases the burden and enhances safety. Organize equipment and charts and place them within easy reach prior to taxiing. Airplane Equipment and Lighting. Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, 14 CFR, Part 91 specifies the basic minimum airplane equipment that is required for night flight. This equipment includes only basic instruments, lights, electrical energy source, and spare fuses. The standard instruments required by 14 CFR Part 91 for instrument flight are a valuable asset for aircraft control at night. Title 14 CFR Part 91 specifies that during the period from sunset to sunrise operating aircraft are required to have a functioning anti-collision light system, including a flashing or rotating beacon and position lights. The anti-collision lights, however, need not be lighted when the pilot in command, PIC, determines that, because of operating conditions, it would be in the interest of safety to turn the lights off. Airplane position lights are arranged similar to those of boats and ships. A red light is positioned on the left wingtip, a green light on the right wingtip, and a white light on the tail. Figure 10.2. This arrangement provides a means to determine the general direction of movement of other airplanes in flight. If both the red and green light of another aircraft are observed, and the red light is on the left and the green to the right, the airplane is flying the same direction. Care must be taken not to overtake the other aircraft and maintain clearance. If red were on the right and green to the left, the airplane could be on a collision course. It is recommended that prior to a night flight, and particularly a cross-country night flight, that a check of the availability and status of lighting systems at the destination airport is made. This information can be found on aeronautical charts and in the chart supplements. The status of each facility can be determined by reviewing pertinent notices to airmen, NOTAMs. Most airports have rotating beacons. The beacon rotates at a constant speed, thus producing a series of light flashes at regular intervals. These flashes may consist of a white flash and one or two different colors that are used to identify various types of landing areas. For example, lighted civilian land airports, alternating white and green lights. Lighted civilian water airports, alternating white and yellow lights. Lighted military airports, alternating white and green lights, but are differentiated from civil airports by dual-peaked, two quick, white flashes, then green. Beacons producing red flashes indicate obstructions or areas considered hazardous to aerial navigation. Steady burning red lights are used to mark obstructions on or near airports and sometimes to supplement flashing lights on en route obstructions. High-intensity, flashing white lights are used to mark some supporting structures of overhead transmission lines that stretch across rivers, chasms, and gorges. These high-intensity lights are also used to identify tall structures, such as chimneys and towers. As a result of technological advancements, runway lighting systems have become quite sophisticated to accommodate takeoffs and landings in various weather conditions. However, if flying is limited to VFR only, it is important to be familiar with the basic lighting of runways and taxiways. The basic runaway lighting system consists of two straight parallel lines of runway edge lights defining the lateral limits of the runway. These lights are aviation white, although aviation yellow may be substituted for a distance of 2,000 feet from the far end of the runway to indicate a caution zone. At some airports, the intensity of the runway edge lights can be activated and adjusted by radio control. The control system consists of a three-step control responsive to 7, 5, and/or 3 microphone clicks. This three-step control turns on lighting facilities capable of either three-step, two-step, or one-step operation. The three-step and two-step lighting facilities can be altered in intensity, while the one-step cannot. All lighting is illuminated for a period of 15 minutes from the most recent time of activation and may not be extinguished prior to end of the 15-minute period. Suggested. 10-5. Figure 10-2. Position lights. Landing lights are not only useful for taxi, takeoffs, and landings, but also provide a means by which airplanes can be seen at night by other pilots. Pilots are encouraged to turn on their landing lights when operating within 10 miles of an airport and below 10,000 feet. Operation lights on applies to both day and night or in conditions of reduced visibility. This should also be done in areas where flocks of birds may be expected. Although turning on aircraft lights supports the see and be seen concept, do not become complacent about keeping a sharp lookout for other aircraft. Most aircraft lights blend in with the stars or the lights of the cities at night and go unnoticed unless a conscious effort is made to distinguish them from other lights. Airport and navigation lighting aids the lighting systems used for airports, runways, obstructions, and other visual aids at night are other important aspects of night flying. Lighted airports located away from congested areas are identified readily at night by the lights outlining the runways. Airports located near or within large cities are often difficult to identify as the airport lights tend to blend with the city lights. It is important not to only know the exact location of an airport relative to the city, but also to be able to identify these airports by the characteristics of their lighting pattern. Aeronautical lights are designed and installed in a variety of colors and configurations, each having its own purpose. Although some lights are used only during low ceiling and visibility conditions, this discussion includes only the lights that are fundamental to visual flight rules, VFR, night operation. Uses to always initially key the mic 7 times. This assures that all controlled lights are turned on to the maximum available intensity. If desired, adjustment can then be made, where the capability is provided, to a lower intensity by keying 5 and/or 3 times. Due to the close proximity of airports using the same frequency, radio-controlled lighting receivers may be set at a low sensitivity requiring the aircraft to be relatively close to activate the system. Consequently, even when lights are on, always key the mic as directed when overflying an airport of intended landing or just prior to entering the final segment of an approach. This assures the aircraft is close enough to activate the system and a full 15-minute lighting duration is available. The length limits of the runway are defined by straight lines of lights across the runway ends. At some airports, the runway threshold lights are aviation green, and the runway end lights are aviation red. At many airports, the taxiways are also lighted. A taxiway edge lighting system consists of blue lights that outline the usable limits of taxi paths. Training for night flight. Learning to safely fly at night takes time, and your proficiency will improve with experience. Pilots should practice the following maneuvers at night and acquire competency in straight and level flight, climbs and descents, level turns, climbing and descending turns, and steep turns. Practicing recovery from unusual attitudes should only be done with a flight instructor. Practice these maneuvers with all the flight deck lights turned off, as well as on. This blackout training simulates an electrical or instrument light failure. Include using the navigation equipment and local nav aids during the training. In spite of fewer references or checkpoints, night cross-country flights do not present particular problems if pre-planning is adequate. Continuously monitor position, time estimates, and fuel consumed. Use nav aids, if available, to assist in monitoring en route progress. Preparation and pre-flight night flying requires that pilots are aware of, and operate within, their abilities and limitations. Although careful planning of any flight is essential, night flying demands more attention to the details of pre-flight preparation and planning. Preparation for a night flight includes a thorough review of the available weather reports and forecasts, with particular attention given to temperature/dew point spread. A narrow temperature/dew point spread may indicate the possibility of fog. Emphasis should also be placed on wind direction and speed, since its effect on the airplane cannot be as easily detected at night as during the day. On night cross-country flights, select and use appropriate aeronautical charts to include the appropriate adjacent 10:6 charts. Course lines should be drawn in black to be more distinguishable in low light conditions. Note prominently lighted checkpoints along the prepared course. Rotating beacons at airports, lighted obstructions, lights of cities or towns, and lights from major highway traffic all provide excellent visual checkpoints. If a global positioning system, GPS, is being used for navigation, ensure that it is working properly before the flight. All necessary waypoints should be loaded properly before the flight, and the database should be checked for accuracy prior to taking off and then checked again once in flight. The use of radio navigation aids and communication facilities adds significantly to the safety and efficiency of night flying. Check all personal equipment prior to flight to ensure proper functioning and operation. All airplane lights should be checked for operation by turning them on momentarily during the pre-flight inspection. Position lights can be checked for loose connections by tapping the light fixture. If the lights blink while being tapped, determine the cause prior to flight. Parking ramps should be checked with a flashlight prior to entering the airplane. During the day, it is quite easy to see stepladders, chuck holes, wheel chucks, and other obstructions, but at night, it is more difficult, and a check of the area can prevent taxiing mishaps. Starting, taxiing, and run up once seated in the airplane and prior to starting the engine. Arrange all items and materials to be used during the flight so they will be readily available and convenient to use. Take extra caution at night to assure the propeller area is clear. Turning the rotating beacon on, or flashing the airplane position light serves to alert persons nearby to remain clear of the propeller. To avoid excessive drain of electrical current from the battery, it is recommended that unnecessary electrical equipment be turned off until after the engine has been started. After starting the engine and when ready to taxi, turn the taxi or landing light on. Be aware that continuous use of the landing light with revolutions per minute, RPM, power settings normally used for taxiing may place an excessive drain on the airplane's electrical system. Also, overheating of the landing light is possible because of inadequate airflow to carry the heat away. Use landing lights only as necessary while taxiing. When using lights, consideration should be given to not blinding other pilots. Taxi slowly, particularly in congested areas. If taxi lines are painted on the ramp or taxiway, follow the lines to ensure a proper path along the route. Use the checklist for the before takeoff and run-up checks and procedures. During the day, forward movement of the airplane can be detected easily. At night, the airplane could creep forward without being noticed unless the pilot is alert. For this possibility, hold or lock the brakes during the run-up and be alert for any forward movement. An instrument check should be done while taxiing to check for proper and correct operation prior to takeoff. Takeoff and climb. Night flying is very different from day flying and demands more attention of the pilot. The most noticeable difference is the limited availability of outside visual references. Therefore, flight instruments should be used to a greater degree in controlling the airplane. This is particularly true on night takeoffs and climbs. Adjust the flight deck lights to a minimum brightness that allow reading the instruments and switches but not hinder outside vision. This also eliminates light reflections on the windshield and windows. After ensuring that the final approach and runway are clear of other air traffic, or when cleared for takeoff by the air traffic controller, turn the landing and taxi lights on and line the airplane up with the center line of the runway. If the runway does not have center line lighting, use the painted center line in the runway edge lights. After the airplane is aligned, note the heading indicator and set to correspond to the known runway direction. To begin the takeoff, release the brakes and advance the throttle smoothly to maximum allowable power. As the airplane accelerates, it should be kept moving straight ahead between and parallel to the runway edge lights. The procedure for night takeoffs is the same as for normal daytime takeoffs except that many of the runway visual cues are not available. Check the flight instruments frequently during the takeoff to ensure the proper pitch attitude, heading, and airspeed are being attained. As the airspeed reaches the normal liftoff speed, adjust the pitch attitude to establish a normal climb. Accomplish this by referring to both outside visual references, such as lights, and to the flight instruments. Figure 10.3. 30. W. 4. 2. OBS. 30. W. 4. 2. OBS. Figure 10.3. Establish a positive climb. After becoming airborne, the darkness of night often makes it difficult to note whether the airplane is getting closer to or farther from the surface. To ensure the airplane continues in a positive climb, be sure a climb is indicated on the attitude indicator, vertical speed indicator, VSI, and altimeter. It is also important to ensure the airspeed is at best climb speed. Make necessary pitch and bank adjustments by referencing the attitude and heading indicators. It is recommended that turns not be made until reaching a safe maneuvering altitude. Although the use of the landing lights is helpful during the takeoff, they become ineffective after the airplane has climbed to an altitude where the light beam no longer extends to the surface. The light can cause distortion when it is reflected by haze, smoke, or clouds that might exist in the climb. Therefore, when the landing light is used for the takeoff, turn it off after the climb is well established provided it is not being used for collision avoidance. Orientation and navigation generally, at night, it is difficult to see clouds and restrictions to visibility, particularly on dark nights or under overcast. When flying under VFR, pilots must exercise caution to avoid flying into clouds. Usually, the first indication of flying into restricted visibility conditions is the gradual disappearance of lights on the ground. If the lights begin to take on an appearance of being surrounded by a halo or glow, use caution in attempting further flight in that same direction. Such a halo or glow around lights on the ground is indicative of ground fog. Remember that if a descent must be made through clouds, smoke, or haze in order to land, the horizontal visibility is considerably less when looking through the restriction than it is when looking straight down through it from above. Under no circumstances should a VFR night flight be made during poor marginal weather conditions unless both the pilot and aircraft are certificated and equipped for flight under Instrument Flight Rules, IFR. Crossing large bodies of water at night in single-engine airplanes could be potentially hazardous. In the event of an engine failure, the pilot may not have any option than to land, ditch, the airplane in the water. Another hazard faced by pilots of all aircraft, due to limited or no lighting, is that the horizon blends with the water. During poor visibility conditions over water, the horizon becomes obscure and may result in a loss of orientation. Even on clear nights, the stars may be reflected on the water surface, which could appear as a continuous array of lights, thus making the horizon difficult to identify. 10-7. Lighted runways, buildings, or other objects may cause illusions to the pilot when seen from different altitudes. At an altitude of 2,000 feet, a group of lights on an object may be seen individually, while at 5,000 feet or higher, the same lights could appear to be one solid light mass. These illusions may become quite acute with altitude changes and, if not overcome, could present problems in respect to approaches to lighted runways. Approaches and landings. When approaching the airport to enter the traffic pattern and land, it is important that the runway lights and other airport lighting be identified as early as possible. If the airport layout is unfamiliar, sighting of the runway may be difficult until very close and due to the maze of lights observed in the area. Figure 10.4, Fly toward the rotating beacon until the lights outlining the runway are distinguishable. To fly a traffic pattern of proper size and direction, the runway threshold and runway edge lights must be positively identified. Once the airport lights are seen, these lights should be kept in sight throughout the approach. Distance may be deceptive at night due to limited lighting conditions. A lack of intervening references on the ground and the inability to compare the size and location of different ground objects cause this. This also applies to the estimation of altitude and speed. Consequently, more dependence must be placed on flight instruments, particularly the altimeter and the airspeed indicator. When entering the traffic pattern, always give yourself plenty of time to complete the before landing checklist. If the heading indicator contains a heading bug, setting it to the runaway heading is an excellent reference for the pattern legs. Maintain the recommended airspeeds and execute the approach and landing in the same manner as during the day. A low, shallow approach is definitely inappropriate during a night operation. The altimeter and VSI should be constantly cross-checked against the airplane's position along the base leg and final approach. A visual approach slope indicator, VASI, is an indispensable aid in establishing and maintaining a proper glide path. Figure 10.5. After turning onto the final approach and aligning the airplane midway between the two rows of runway edge lights, note and correct for any wind drift. Throughout the final approach, use pitch and power to maintain a stabilized approach. Flaps are used the same as in a normal approach. Usually, halfway through the final approach, the landing light is turned on. Earlier use of the landing light may be necessary because of operation lights on or for local traffic considerations. The landing light is sometimes ineffective since the light beam will usually not reach the ground from higher altitudes. The light may even be reflected back into the pilot's eyes by any existing haze, smoke, or fog. This disadvantage is overshadowed by the safety considerations provided by using the operation lights on procedure around other traffic. The roundout and touchdown is made in the same manner as in day landings. At night, the judgment of height, speed, and sink rate is impaired by the scarcity of observable objects in the landing area. An inexperienced pilot may have a tendency. Below glide path. On glide path. Above glide path. Far bar. Far bar. Far bar. Near bar. Near bar. Near bar. If you see red over red, you are below glide path. If both light bars are white, you are too high. If the far bar is red and the near bar is white, you are on the glide path. The memory aid red over white, you're all right, is helpful in recalling the correct sequence of light. Figure 10.4. Use light patterns for orientation. Figure 10.5. VASI. 10-8. To round out too high until attaining familiarity with the proper height for the correct round out. To aid in determining the proper round out point, continue a constant approach descent until the landing lights reflect on the runway and tire marks on the runway can be seen clearly. At this point, the round out is started smoothly and the throttle gradually reduced to idle as the airplane is touching down. Figure 10.6. During landings without the use of landing lights, the round out may be started when the runway lights at the far end of the runway first appear to be rising higher than the nose of the airplane. This demands a smooth and very timely round out and requires that the pilot feel for the runway surface using power and pitch changes, as necessary, for the airplane to settle slowly to the runway. Blackout landings should always be included in night pilot training as an emergency procedure. Figure 10.6. Round out when tire marks are visible. Night emergencies. Perhaps the greatest concern about flying a single-engine airplane at night is the possibility of a complete engine failure and the subsequent emergency landing. This is a legitimate concern, even though continuing flight into adverse weather and poor pilot judgment account for most serious accidents. If the engine fails at night, there are several important procedures and considerations to keep in mind. They are as follows. Maintain positive control of the airplane and establish the best glide configuration and airspeed. Turn the airplane towards an airport or away from congested areas. Check to determine the cause of the engine malfunction, such as the position of fuel selectors, magneto switch, or primer. If possible, the cause of the malfunction should be corrected immediately and the engine restarted. Announce the emergency situation to Air Traffic Control, ATC, or Universal Communications, Unicom. If already in radio contact with the facility, do not change frequencies unless instructed to change. If the condition of the nearby terrain is known and is suitable for a forced landing, Turn towards an unlighted portion of the area and plan an emergency forced landing to an unlighted portion. Consider an emergency landing area close to public access if possible. This may facilitate rescue or help, if needed. Maintain orientation with the wind to avoid a downwind landing. Complete the before landing checklist, and check the landing lights for operation at altitude and turn on in sufficient time to illuminate the terrain or obstacles along the flight path. The landing should be completed in the normal landing attitude at the slowest possible airspeed. If the landing lights are unusable and outside visual references are not available, the airplane should be held in level landing attitude until the ground is contacted. After landing, turn off all switches and evacuate the airplane as quickly as possible. Chapter Summary: Night operations present additional risks that must be identified and assessed. Night flying operations should not be encouraged or attempted, except by pilots that are certificated, current, and proficient in night flying. Prior to 10-9. Attempting night operations, pilots should receive training and be familiar with the risks associated with night flight and how they differ from daylight operations. Even for experienced pilots, night VFR operations should only be conducted in unrestricted visibility, favorable winds, both on the surface and aloft, and no turbulence. Additional information on pilot vision and illusions can be found in FAA Brochure AM 498 and also Chapters 2 and 17 of the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, FAA-H-8083-3B, at www.fa.gov. Additional information on lighting aids can be found in Chapter 2 of the Aeronautical Information Manual, AIM, which can be accessed at www.fa.gov. 10-10.